or a positive for you moving forward. I mean, I know for myself, managing data is a core part of what I do every day, no matter what the shoot I'm on. So working as a DIT or working with other people that are DITs, I can jump right into that space and talk about, you know, backup solutions and archive management and that kind of stuff. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, for all of my shoots, I've always had a DIT or a data wrangler whose job it is to take the files that we shoot and then move them and safeguard them and make sure that every frame is there. And I get that position. I understand it, and I think that it's pretty simple. I mean, you have to run them through programs, and if there's an issue, that's it. But a trained chimpanzee can do it. So I think that that job is usually for an intern or a nerd that you can find and bring them in and do it for. So I don't really think that that's very connected with the filming of it. That's more data and hard drive issues. So yeah, I get that. I think that in the future, we are talking about the future of digital filmmaking. I think that those jobs will be coveted, and probably people that are older than me will be brought on to do it because everything will, I think, will be in 3D. So you'll need more data to be wrangled. You'll have 2 hard drives because you'll have 2 cameras. So that job will probably be a lot more intense and take much longer, obviously twice as long.
And you need someone who is a data person.
Yeah, you don't have to think about that.
I think you're kind of wrong in that you can't have a trained chimpanzee doing it, because I've actually...
So something goes wrong.
I've kicked a data wrangler off set who didn't know what they were doing.
I mean, it's one of those things, you got to find somebody that's good. I mean, I'm not saying to hire an idiot, but yeah, it is one of those things that you could hand to somebody and say, this is your one job. I mean, don't trust the camera operator to do it, because he might have something else on his mind, like, oh, I got to make sure that the focus puller is working and all that stuff. So yeah, it's very important to hire a DIT. Always do it, but that's a relatively simple issue, and usually they'll just be managing the files. They're not going to be, they won't know that much about the metadata and actually pulling a good image out of it. That would be somebody in post. As for the question, sorry, the question that I was asked, I do think that since these cameras are going to be recorded in metadata in the future, and that it's not going to be final cut, whatever you shoot is the final image, I do think that people that are growing up in this era of filmmaking will have benefit over people that have their brains, I mean, just coded in something else. I think that growing up with these classes and learning about metadata in college will benefit these new upcoming filmmakers.
So let's jump, before we jump into 3D, because that's exciting for everybody, but one of the things that I want to talk about is the cameras right there, is the new series Canon and Nikon cameras that shoot HD video, and that really are, from a cost perspective, are in a totally different class from this camera. From an image perspective, are close in a way that I think you could probably, I'm sure you can't fool a professional colorist, and I'm sure you can't fool somebody as experienced as the people that we have on this panel, but I bet we could fool most of you in the audience about what those camera technologies are and kind of how they work. So maybe each will just go down the line, and you can kind of give your analysis of the Canon 5D Mark II, 7D, Nikon.
I just wanted to fill in a bit to explain to people, metadata is the information that the camera records about the lens and the f-stop, and especially with some of these newer lenses, that used to be the, was it the script writers or the person who kept the camera log? Sure. Because when you're working, shooting something that has visual effects in it, you need to record specific information about the lens and where it's set in its aperture and how far the people are away from the camera, and so that when you're adding things to it later, all of that information will make most people's life much easier. And these new generations of cameras are actually recording all of that information, and it's contained within the digital files.
If you want to start, or shall I start?
No, please.
it's interesting. We're in an era of what I call equipment porn. Started by this camera. Yeah, people are really obsessed with the equipment now. And in a way that's good and in a way it's bad. In the way it's bad is that the equipment is almost more important than the people using it. You know, someone who's qualified to shoot, someone who has, you know, experience, skill, talent, whatever, can make pretty pictures with anything. And sometimes that's in spite of the equipment, and sometimes that's because of the equipment. But it's not the equipment. These new cameras are great. I mean, they're very cost effective. They have a lot of technical limitations. They scare me a little bit. So, you know, if someone hands me that camera and says, you know, go for it, it's going to go. Oh, in a way, it's kind of free because there's only so much you can do with it. You know, you kind of go, oh, it's in focus. You know, if it's not, maybe it's artistic. Maybe it'll be cool. You know, and you can kind of let yourself go a little bit because you just don't have the control. The files are, you know, highly compressed. You can push them around a little bit. There's a guy in the UK who actually makes some camera curves for these things and allows you some latitude that color correct later. But you can't really see focus. You have to watch everything through this little standard depth display. They moray like crazy because they're not really designed for motion picture work. So you have this massive still sensor. But the resolution is way too high for HD, so what do you do when you start skipping photosites and skipping lines? So normally if the pixels are that close together, you don't have a problem resolving fine lines. But if they're that far apart, you have a lot of stuff that falls in between. And the pixel, you know, the sensor, well, the processor can't figure out where those are from frame to frame, so you got all this mooring stuff going on. It's really nasty. But for the price, you cannot beat it. And that's the thing, you know, if that's all you can afford, take it, go for it, you know, make it work. And people are doing that and making spectacular images out of it. But, you know, if you can get an Alexa, you're going to be a lot happier. You know, it's funny, we used to talk about people saying, you know, we're on a budget, you know, we can only afford a red. We go, oh, okay. Well, now people are saying, well, we can't afford a red, we have to go on a 5D.
This is high end now.
Yeah, this is high end these days. It's really staggering what's happening in a year or two.
I was going to say, we have a Sony that we record.
Oh, an EX1 or
Yeah, EX1, but we record to the Key Pro.
Yes.
Which does what the Alexa does.
And that's,
it's 10-bit uncompressed.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, you have to know what the strengths of these cameras are. That's the big stumbling block. You can make anything look good if you're talented, skilled, experienced, whatever. But you have to know how the camera's going to break. You don't want to shoot a brick wall on this camera. You don't want to shoot 120 frames per second green screen on this camera because it's going to be soft and hard to composite. You don't want to shoot green screen on an EX1 or an EX3 to the SYS cards because you're going to have a hell of a time telling a key. It has the weirdest motion blur I have ever seen in my life. But if you record it to a Key Pro, yeah, you record it to an external deck that's recording 10-bit ProRes, it's beautiful. I mean, you know, so that's the big stumbling block now is we have all these choices, but they all fit little niches. We don't have one camera that does everything we need right now. If there's a 4K Alexa out there, would be set, but that doesn't exist yet.
So Lisa, you're probably positioned in a great way to talk about having worked with medical imaging in the tech sector here in Silicon Valley to talk about, you know, the evolution from 1 megapixel now to 14, 18 megapixel, and then on the still side, and then the video side, which wasn't even possible at that point. Now we're in, you know, in this space and having shot extensively with the 7D probably.
Yeah, I'm actually a really weird mix of geek and an artist. I grew up in the Silicon Valley. My father was a newspaper photographer, so for me, I actually kind of fought it until I got into high school, and I wanted to be a rock and roll photographer, and you know, handed me a camera, and so I sort of learned by osmosis. But it's the technology. I think what's happening is Silicon Valley is used to the faster processors and the more memory, and things have just sort of gone forward, and it's what is it, Moore's law that just keeps pushing things forward. That's beginning to happen in terms of the image resolution that you can get with cameras, and the prices of good quality cameras keep dropping as long as you understand the weaknesses and the strengths of each camera. It's possible now to actually, I think it's possible if you pay attention. I'm always telling people, if you pay attention to post-production in your pre-production, you're more likely to get a good image, and you're more likely to get all of what you want, because you're taking into account the weaknesses of these cameras by having your post-production supervisor